but acknowledge what to say, what not to say.
Well, you can say whatever you want. We promise to still be your friend afterwards. Thanks for
Okay.
coming on tonight. We're live streaming on YouTube. We probably have at least 3 viewers in the next 2 weeks. So your message is really going to get out to the world, Rob. John knows you better than I do and invited you on, and I'm grateful that he did. But since you guys are friends, I'll let John do a better job of introducing you than I could. I just know about your professional accolades.
All right, I didn't really share it with anybody in my network. I wasn't sure how that was going to play out, but is it being recorded so it can be played later?
Yeah, we just
YouTube
started
right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, you can
Right.
check on there.
Hello, YouTubers.
I'm John, and I'm your host along with Lester. And this is our special guest tonight, Rob Creighton. Thanks for joining us. Rob and I have been friends for, I was going to say 5 years. Rob, do you know when it began?
Probably 5 years. Yeah, it's been about 5 years since we've been hanging out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just conversations in the hot tub. Rob was always up to something, and every time we'd talk, it was always an interesting conversation. And Rob's the kind of guy who shows up to the Christmas party with multiple girls. They're not all for him, but he's watching some videos of you kite surfing has made me very scared to do it with you. I mean,
It's very safe. No animals were harmed to the making of.
But it looks very intense. It looks like you're a professional. So if you take the kites that you build, that you just recently had a $6 million investment in moving this thing forward, as serious as you do your kite surfing, it's going to be a fun conversation tonight. So Lester prepared these questions. He loves questions like the first one. Like, okay. I'll ask the first one. I'll let Lester guide it from here. But Rob, what was growing up like for you?
So I grew up in Minnesota, and I've always been really interested in science and technology. So I was kind of a big nerd. So I got bullied a lot when I was a kid. But I survived junior high, and in high school, I kind of let my geek flag fly, and junior year I won the Minnesota State Science Challenge, building a machine that shot basketballs into a hoop. And that was kind of my first experience realizing that I could find a problem and apply, physics and science and solve the problem. And that was a transformational moment for me. And then in my life I've done a lot of inventing, mostly in biotechnology, and then started doing stuff in energy around 2000. So yeah, that's
what are some of the things that you're really proud of having invented before that nobody ever knew about? Like a great song the Beatles wrote, but they never published. Do you have something?
Yeah, I have a machine I built while I was working in a laboratory. I worked in a genetics laboratory at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I built this really cool machine that I called an electromagnetophoretic DNA mounting system. And it used electrophoresis and magnetic fields to be like micro tweezers to manipulate chromosomes of DNA and mount them on cover slips. It was a super cool machine, and it never really went anywhere. It helped me solve a really specific problem for an experiment I was doing, but it was too complicated and nobody ever really understood how it worked. And I ended up kind of moving on before it became, something that amounted to anything.
Do you think you'll ever circle back on that, or is the time passed on that project?
There's a Japanese lab that's doing similar work, and I've read their papers, and sometimes I'm like, oh, you guys are so close. But I feel like I just call them and give them all my data from 2000, or maybe 1999 or something, 1998. But I don't know. I haven't done that yet. I'm still trying to figure out how I don't speak Japanese, so
So there are any Japanese folks watching that know about this very long name technology that would be good for the human team? Yeah. Rob's got some papers for you. So help me understand, because I know you earned your degree in genetics and your MBA in strategic management, and you worked in labs at universities. So you're obviously a really smart dude. How in the world do you connect genetics to strategic management to deciding to fly kites for a living?
It's a long, circuitous path, but I guess the simplest explanation is that we use genetic algorithms in our design process. So we actually take the same math that happens in chromosomes and cells while they kind of recombine to make new organisms, and we basically use that same math to help optimize our design process. So
for the kites.
For the kites, yeah.
Wow. So is it? I've heard of biomimicry before. Would you say this is a biomimicry type experiment where you're looking at nature and trying to?
It is, yeah. It's biomimicry, but we're not mimicking. Like, we're not mimicking the designs. Like biomimicry oftentimes refers to like a wing that's like modeled after a whale fin or something to improve the aerodynamic efficiency. We actually use biomimicry on the process of evolution applied to synthetic machines.
Is that as cool as it sounds like it is, or is it a lot of lab work from a lot of smart people who are happy to get to do it?
It's cool because it's like an iterative design process where you set up a model. So modeling and simulation, you basically build, this is the math that we think defines reality. So a model is like, you build this model. And so we build these models on the way our wings perform, our kites perform, in different environmental conditions. And then we try to redesign the machine to be optimized for those conditions. So it's kind of like, think of like an organism that's trying to get better at like fitting a niche in nature. Like, a hawk might be a little bit faster, or a hummingbird might be able to flit around a little bit better, like some design change that makes a hummingbird a better hummingbird. Nature tests those designs against, using natural selection. So in nature, that process is pretty, brutal, in that, 1 out of 1,000 organisms that are born will survive the next generation. And then that organism will create, copies of itself and then breed and whatnot. That same thing happens kind of in the marketplace with mechanical designs, where you get a machine like think of like a Tesla. Like the first Tesla that came out, was kind of not that great, and then they do another generation of it, and they keep getting better and longer range and more optimized design. And that's an iterative process, and they're heading towards a goal, and we can kind of do the same thing in software, where you don't actually have to build it, as long as your model is accurate and is a good prediction of how that system's going to behave in a native environment. So we can do a lot in software to accelerate the design process. I think people don't understand how cool it is. That's what's cool to me. That's what gets me excited, as we go through our designs and build multiple generations of systems. And we're always testing those systems against nature, but we're also feeding that data into our models and simulations so we can accelerate our optimization, our design process. So in a way, our machines are evolving to get better at doing their job.
So it's like watching, you birthed this child, and now you're watching the generations of its children grow up and perform even better. And you're like, yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, I mean, we call it the parameterization of design. So instead of like having like a pen and paper where you draw something out and you build it and then you test it, we do all that in software. So it means that we can move faster, because software moves a lot faster. So our generation. So I think we have like almost like 800 different parameters in our design and maybe 1 million lines of code. So it's not just the physical design I'm talking about, it's also the controller design that's affecting kind of how it behaves in different environments. So our system is an integrated hardware and software solution. So it's both the software that's evolving on the controller and the mechanical design. We put that into our models and simulation, and then make lots of different potential versions of the technology.
So by parameters, you're like, I want this thing to stay this high above the ground before the backup thing comes on to lift it up, and it's got to be able to turn at this when it's 58 degrees and there's a mist outside kind of parameter, or is that not what a parameter is?
Yeah, I mean, that's more like a behavior. It's like the simplest mathematical abstraction of the design. So the parameter defines the design and everything that goes into building it, and every part that goes into it is a parameter, basically.
John, you were smiling real big. Is there something you were thinking about?
Every time I see Rob for the past few years, I've been like, so you've got a prototype yet? How big is it? How much does it cost?
Oh, that's great. Well, yeah, actually, we do have a prototype we're building for the Marines right now. It's about 12-foot wingspan, weighs about 40 pounds. The first one is pretty expensive because it has many millions of dollars of design and engineering that went into it, and that's the engineering time is the expensive piece. But of the parts that go into it, it's only 40 pounds of stuff. So, some carbon fiber, some epoxy, some, we build everything in our shop. So, yeah. So we got, I think we're on C1-4. We're going to be up, I think we'll have 12 different prototypes in this particular project before we take all that data and then redesign it to the C2 series, which will be closer to the system we plan to deploy.
Last time I remember, it was closer to like a 27 or 29 foot kite that did 365 kilowatt hours. Is this like half that much energy production, being that it's?
Oh, yeah, a tenth of it. It's a lot smaller. So I think that system was peak output maybe 15. Well, the peak was closer to 60, but the kind of average output in we call it a class 2 wind area would be about 20 kilowatts on average. So this system we're building now is about 1.4 kilowatts on average. So quite a bit less power output, but it's much more mobile, much smaller, much it fits the Marines' needs for mobile power better than the larger system did.
When you say 1.14, you mean per hour of in the air with under wind conditions, optimal wind conditions?
Yeah, I mean it's hard. It's hard to explain. So, if you think like over the course of a year at a particular site, you can kind of define it. So the average output for the whole year would be about 1.4 kilowatts. So that's
over 24 hours a day.
Yeah, over a whole year. So it's a big average over a much larger period of time.
You're saying over 365 days.
Yeah. So it's so a kilowatt's instantaneous power. So if you did one kilowatt and you let it go for an hour, it'd be 1 kilowatt hour. So yeah, it's a kilowatt hours is a measure of energy, kilowatts measure of power. So the average output in kilowatts is about 1.4 kilowatts. And these are all based on models of how we expect the wind to behave. We actually haven't tested it for 365 degrees in a native wind environment. That'll be hopefully in May or April. We'll be finally ready to fly the system, reliably in those conditions.
So do you have a metric for people listening to understand what that means? Is this going to power one house on average, a half a house? What would you say?
Well, the average US household is like 1.2 kilowatts. So it would power one household basically. Yeah.
And one of the things I've always been curious about, maybe you saw the LinkedIn post I tagged you on. I saw somebody else that had your kite and I was like, what? And it looked like, because I'd never visualized it like I did in the video, but it looked like it would take a significant amount of energy to get the kite, especially the size of the one I saw, up in the air and then to redock it. And I imagine there's probably like certain weather conditions like hurricane force winds where you're not going to want to fly your kite, right? So you're docking it and undocking it. How much energy in relation to its daily production does it take to actually get it up and bring it down, would you say?
Well, it takes more power in the short term, but if that docking procedure takes 5 minutes, then it's not using that much energy because you're going to run the thing for 24 hours and you're only landing it, launching it for 5-10 minutes. So the actual amount of energy that it takes to launch and land is pretty small relative to the production over the whole day. So
let's take this back. I was just going to ask to take it back a notch because we're talking about stuff and people might not even know what they were talking about. Rob created a company that has kites and the kites catch that wind and they turn it into energy. And just got a contract to help the Marines do this. Why are the Marines interested in technology like this?
So when the Marines are operating in remote places, they've got to bring everything with them. So one of the challenges they have is they need electricity for their computers, for the radios. In some cases, if it's their HVAC systems, heating systems, water, they have a lot of needs for power in remote places. And they can bring diesel generators, which is what they do primarily now. So diesel generators, like, been around for 100 years. They work great. They've been using them forever. But the problem with those is they have to keep supplying fuel to those systems. So if you're in a remote place for a long period of time, you got to resupply every couple of days, so you have enough fuel for your generators. That becomes, a big challenge for them, especially if their supply chains being disrupted by people that are actively trying to, like, blow up their fuel trucks and stuff. So they really want to reduce that fuel consumption over time. So by bringing like a solar panel with them, they can reduce that fuel by, a lot, like maybe like 40%. But solar panels are pretty heavy, and you have to set them up, and you got to make sure they're clean. You got, there's all sorts of issues with solar panels, especially for these mobile applications that are difficult. Our system, just in terms of weight, so like our little 40 pound system would produce as much power as close to 2,000 pounds of solar panels. So
that's a big deal for logistics. So basically, it's for shipping and easy.
I did the math wrong. It's about 20x solar panels. So I guess 800 pounds of solar panels. But yeah, it's still a lot. It's a 20x different in the weight they haul with them. So they can bring our little thing along, and then when it's windy, they generate so much more power. They can charge everything they have, and we estimate like over a year, maybe 80% reduction in fuel resupply needs. So it's a big, big difference. And instead of a convoy every 3 days, they have a convoy every 15 days. And that's a big deal for their resupply needs.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's super rad. So you might use solar at a place that's a consistent base with consistent guys, and you can only clean the bathroom so many times, with the enlisted guys. And so they can go clean solar panels if they need to in a desert. It's not that big of a deal. But when you're out in the middle of nowhere, way out front, where there's no road to get a giant fuel truck to supply you and to put diesel in your generators, you can be in a pretty bad position pretty quickly if you ran out of energy. And so this is solving that problem.
That's right. It gives them flexibility. It makes their energy supply chain more resilient, makes them less dependent on diesel fuel, especially for mission critical systems like their radios or their radar, or their antennas, things that they need power for. Electronics doesn't use a lot of power, so our power is really, really valuable. I mean, in terms of like your electricity, you might pay 15 cents a kilowatt hour for your electricity at your house. The Marines pay $4 a kilowatt hour in some cases. So it's just really expensive electricity, and that's why we can use our riskier, newer technology to supply that, because it's worth the risk for them to have that power that's not dependent on the diesel supply chain.
Makes a lot of sense. John, questions?
I mean, they're probably just going to be boring for viewers, but I'm just thinking about, is it set up where there's sensors like a decent distance from the actual kite, so wind conditions and before they get there? So if it's going to be a crappy day for wind, you just go ahead and dock the kite so it's not up there buzzing around using energy to stay afloat. I imagine there's some threshold of wind that even makes sense to have it up, and maybe it goes days without ever docking. And then it might, I'm just curious about the behavior that you're expecting and what you've seen in your simulations.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to measure the wind at the altitude that our systems fly at. So in many ways, the system is its own sensor. I mean, we can fly up, fly a few cycles, see how much power we get, and then we know what the wind conditions are based on the amount of power we generate. So our system is kind of the wind sensor. The sensor that would do what our system does costs more than our system does. So you could bring a sensor. It's this LiDAR laser, system that can like measure the wind at different altitudes. And these things are very expensive machines that are heavy and have all the lasers and stuff. So our system actually gives you depending on how much power it generates, it knows how much wind there is. And if there's not enough wind, you can leave it aloft if you want to use it as an antenna, or you want to use it for cameras, or you want to use it for other stuff, or you can choose to land it. So the operator basically has, two buttons. Like they'll get a data thing on their little iPad and says, we're generating this much power, and this is all the data services that we are providing do you want to continue flying? It's using this amount of energy because there's not enough wind. But if there's enough wind, it can stay aloft indefinitely. Up to pretty high. I mean, I think we flew recently at like a 45-mile-per-hour wind, which was no problem. So we're kind of seeing what that range is experimentally. Our models say we can fly a lot faster, higher wind, but yeah, like hurricane winds, probably not. Tornadoes, probably not a great idea to be flying around. Hail, thunderstorms. Maybe you don't want to be flying when the lightning is, cracking. So it's like at some point, storm conditions, it makes more sense to land than it does to keep trying to fly through them.
Well, I'm curious about wear parts, like the tether. How big around is that, would you say, for the new models?
Oh, the small one, it's super tiny. I don't even know what the net diameter is off the top of my head. I mean, it's basically a copper core with a strength, it's like a composite. It's basically carbon fiber tethers that connect it. And then it's got a kind of a plastic sheath around it to protect it from damage. But it doesn't wear on anything. It's not like it's reeling on and off. It's anchored and it doesn't have any wear parts on the tether when it's flying. We'll have a winch that it deploys with, but it shouldn't have any tension in it when it's on the winch. It's not designed to, the winch isn't designed to hold it at tension. It's just designed to store the cable so it doesn't get, wrapped up in stuff on the ground.
So we're talking about locking it up there. And, whenever I was flying kites when I was a kid with my dogs, the kinds that like dragons and rainbows and stuff on them, like the only way that I could lock it was like to lock my little string into the handle, right?
Yeah.
And
I lost you, Lester.
aren't these things kind of more like drones? Like aren't these things more like drones or kites? Can you kind of define like what it means to get them up and what it takes to keep them up? We know they make energy when they're up there, but what do they look like? Is it
They
like
look like
right?
They look like a platypus. They're like a platypus. They're like a hybrid between a quad rotor helicopter and a gliding plane. So we'll show pictures hopefully by the spring. We're hoping to show more pictures and video. It's just we've had intellectual property issues, and we're trying to make sure we're careful about that, because once we release things publicly, we've designed so many parts that we've learned from all of our competitors. Google X had a project, so we've learned from them. We've learned from a lot of the European companies that are doing work. We've learned from our own experience. We've been working on this for 15 years. So like I said, our design software and our controller are all custom software that we've kind of developed in-house over the last 15 years.
And the software just designed to maximize the energy output by getting it up at the right time, keeping it at the best location. Like, how high up does this thing go?
The current system flies on like a 400-foot tether, and it only flies around 250 feet. So not super high, but it flies about a 45-degree angle, sometimes lower, depends. These are all things that we're experimenting with. There's so many considerations that you have to, like I said, there's 800 parameters, and then within the model, there's all these performance metrics that we measure the performance on. There's certain boundary conditions that we can't exceed based on, like the tether breaks at a certain load case, so the controller is designed never to exceed that. So there's a lot of feedback that happens between the design and the performance.
Yeah, so if the tether breaks, you don't have to worry about the live wire going around and shocking dogs in neighborhoods because it's still producing.
No, it's still under control. We actually had a tether break at our first test site. The Navy came down, and it turned out we'd anchored the system to our minivan that is like my Windlift CTO, Andy, had an old minivan that he sold to the company that we use as like a test vehicle that could fit all of our stuff. We didn't realize that the trailer on the minivan, came down a little bit, and then at the edge of it was like kind of chipped steel and paint, and that turns out that's like a serrated knife edge. So if the tether rubs against it, it just sheared it right off. So our first test flight, we actually broke the tether. First time ever that we'd ever broken a tether in 12 years of testing systems. We broke the tether, but we had protocol in place, and the system, we recovered it. It landed fine, just right next to the landing site. So we keep it under control even when it's in the air.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So it's like Elon throwing the ball and breaking a Cybertruck window. Did you say the Navy came to watch this? Like you were actually?
Yeah.
At least they got to see.
They had a bunch of people come down from the Navy Research Lab. We're working with the vehicle research group there, and they're amazing. They're like the people who like invented the first drone, basically, like in 2000. So 20 years ago, they did the first drone that was used by the Marines. So they're really great team, and they came down. We were showing them what we've been working on, and yeah, it turned out 20-year-old minivan wasn't the best anchor system, and so we're not going to ship the final product with the 20-year-old minivan. That's
Seems like a tank would probably be a better option, right? Just an old tank.
Just all you need is basically just a sandbag on the ground to hold it down.
You just don't need a partially open can to go ahead and rip off.
And we have these little ground anchors. You can even screw them into the ground. We need anchors because when this thing pulls, it pulls really hard. But yeah, you need a good anchor system for it. And
that's
yeah, 20-year-old minivan wasn't the best anchor.
So I have two questions based on what you just said. One is, so you connected with these military guys. Was that always the plan, that you knew this would be military use, or did it start out with a way to make electricity? What was the evolution of you connecting with the military? And is it one of those things where they find you like a spy movie where it's like, we hear you have some great technology and you have no idea how they even found out about it, or do you have to let them know?
No, it was completely serendipity. I met a guy who was helping me raise some private capital to fund. The goal originally was to deploy these systems like in Africa and villages to help them with their pump water irrigation. We had a simple mechanical design that was like designed to be pretty low tech in some ways. I mean, it was like high tech material, high tech design, low tech operation that anybody could work with. But turned out that approach was not viable because like the non-governmental organizations that fund like these projects in Africa, they do not pay for research and development. They want to fund like projects with existing technology. They don't want to take risks on technology. So yeah, this guy was trying to raise money. He was at a dinner party in DC somewhere, ends up sitting next to a colonel in the Army at this dinner party, and this colonel was part of the Power Surety task force. And they were just talking. He was like, yeah, I'm raising money for this company. They're trying to deploy power in remote places in Africa. He's like, that's interesting. We need a lot of power, remote power in the Army. Have them come talk to us. We'd like to hear what they're doing. So we drove up, pitched them, and then like 2 weeks later, they called us and said, yeah, we just got $1 million in funding from the Obama administration, I think, at the time, and like, give us a proposal, we can fund it. So we gave them a proposal for like $967,000, and they funded it. And in retrospect, I wish I would have asked the last, $33,000. We could have used that. We could have used that money.
You're like, we're never going to need that. So that's the second thing I was going to ask, because you said you've been at it for 15 years, which means you care a lot about it and know that it has a huge potential impact and payoff for the resiliency. But how'd you stick at it for 15 years? Because from what you just said, there were some lean times too. Like, what was that like? How'd you overcome it? What was the worst time? Whatever you want to share about that journey.
Oh gosh, we've almost gone bankrupt maybe 4 or 5 times in 15 years, literally days, hours away from completely running out of money. And you've just managed to find either an investor that's come in. It's weird in the military world. It's like, when you're doing projects and your company's growing, you're always cash flow challenged. So yeah, it's been touch and go a lot. Even with this new contract, you hear 6.2 million, it sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, and we've grown our team to 20 people and we're doing great, but we're always a little bit behind on the cash because every time we grow, we got to make our payroll before we get, we get paid back by the government for the work we do for them. So we're always, we're always behind on the payrolls, and I've had to really, it's been hard. We're undercapitalized for our ambition, let's just say.
That makes sense. Like, yeah, there's never enough, and you probably feel like I just need all the money because we can solve some really big problems pretty quickly if I could afford you need 20 more really good scientists? Do you like, I mean, they're not
Yeah, I
cheap,
mean,
right?
we're at a point now where we've got a really solid team. The problem is we're not big enough that we have, you know, backup for people. Like we just found out today that one of our employees is taking another job opportunity. It's a great opportunity for him. I'm really excited for him to have this opportunity, but to replace that one person is going to slow us down. And, you know, it's because we don't have enough people, you know, we don't have understudies for everybody.
Right.
So anybody that we lose is going to slow down our time. And that's the issue, you know, like how long is it going to take before we have a system that's reliable enough that the Marines are going to want to use it on an island in the South Pacific and depend on this for critical, you know, systems.
Right.
Really depends on how much funding we get. And, you know, I mean, we spend $10 million on one cruise, you know, versus $6 million on a new technology that might change the whole game. So, you know, finding money for research and development is really hard. I think of the companies that entered our program we're in right now that got to the stage we are, I think there were over 1,000 companies that applied for the program we were in. We are the only company in that whole program that made it to this step. So it's really competitive. It's really difficult, and the military changes their priorities often, and it's tough to find champions. But they are the only organization that will pay for research and development for technology they want to buy, and that's the difference between the military and like other organizations. Well, I mean, like private companies will pay for research and development, but they want to own a piece of the future of your company to get that. Whereas the military, they just want to buy your system. So it's hard and it's competitive, and it's let's say the Marines are a tough customer. They you know, and it's yeah,
It's good to hear.
It's been a trip. I mean, it's been a trip. You know, it's been so competitive. We're finally at this point, and like we're finally you know, we're finally making it work. You know, we don't need to raise money for the first time in history. You know, in the past I had to raise money to stay alive. Now I need to raise money to grow and pursue a lot of other opportunities that we have as an organization. So it's a great problem to have. It's you know, that's I'm going to be out in public a lot more and hopefully sharing more of our work with the public so we can get some, you know, get the funding and get the talent, recruiting talent. You know, we need to recruit people and then find investors who can really help us scale the organization. Is going to be important next year.
How does it work with the military thing? So do you have something that you're supposed to deliver and contingent upon this delivery of some prototype, there's more funding waiting to be unlocked? Or is it just like, I hope that you hope you've made it far enough then where it's sellable for profit and no longer needs funding to be unlocked?
It's a good question. So the military, as a process, when they buy things, it's called they write requirements, and it's kind of backwards in that they write requirements for technology that doesn't exist yet. They don't really know exactly what it can do. They just have this wish list of this is what we hope it can do. And we have to constantly push back on them and say, okay, this technology is like game changer, like 20 times better than what you're doing right now. But it has these limitations and these challenges, and the requirements you're giving us are for something that is just can't exist. It's, you know, or maybe could after, you know, $500 million of research and development, but you've given us 6 million. So this is what we can deliver with the amount of money that you're giving us. And, you know, we have to be very transparent. I mean, it's, you know, when you have a military contract, they're in your books. Everything that you do is completely transparent. We have to give them, you know, a report every 2 weeks, and they ask us questions, and we're kept on a very, very tight, you know, tight leash. And, you know, we're performing under budget, on schedule. The project is going great. But managing their expectations, making them understand that, you know, we aren't a, you know, billion-dollar company that's investing our shareholder money in this project so that we can develop a product that you're going to want to buy hundreds of millions of dollars, a year of the product. We just don't have the capital. And the military is, I'd say, the biggest challenge of using this military funding is that most investors don't understand how that works. They alternately think it's too good of a deal to be true, or it's a bad deal because our profit margins are like very small. Like we don't really make. They don't even call it profit. They pay us. They reimburse us for our costs, and they give us a fee for managing the contract, and that fee is like 4% of the contract price. So it's really, really slim margin. That's the money that we need to bootstrap on. That's our capital. That's our fee. Whereas a typical company will have 50% profit margins that they can reinvest in organic growth. Whereas our organic growth is happening because the military is investing in intellectual property. We own that IP, and that IP could be very valuable someday. But it's really hard for investors to judge the value of intellectual property. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it did. Are there any cool things that they get rights to? Like you make this out of the world thing and then you can't sell it to Russia? Like you could, or you can't even sell it to an individual. It just goes to the military if they help support it for X number of years.
In some cases, that's true. For our technology, I think they don't see it that way. So our technology, it's called ITAR restrictions. We don't have any on our project yet. I mean, I actually think the technology is very strategic and could be important to the future of our national security. But I think when they see our prototypes operating, and then they suddenly realize like what a huge advantage it's going to give us in persistent operations, they may start to classify it. But in some ways, it's too far behind now because the data's all been released, by a lot of different companies that have done this work. So I don't see it ever being classified or ITAR restricted. I think they want us to sell it around the world. They want to buy it so they can reduce their energy footprint and save them money. And they want us to mass produce as many of these as possible and sell them around the world so that their cost is reduced. We get some economies of scale at that point. And we're on the learning curve where the more we make, the cheaper we can make them, and the better performing we'll make them.
So with wind and solar, they both suffer from the same problem for different reasons, which is an intermittency problem, which is a word I'm sure you're familiar with, meaning that the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time. So what are you doing to get the power into the batteries, or how's that part work? Or does storage come with it? Do you have some?
Yeah, we're gonna ship it with storage. I mean, right now the storage solutions they have are pretty heavy and they're not ideal. They're not optimized for our application. Like the Navy has these batteries, but the Navy batteries cost like like $4,000 a kilowatt hour. Whereas like you can buy a Tesla battery now is like $150 a kilowatt hour. So their batteries are expensive and heavy. And I think we estimated like we can fill some crazy number of batteries in a day. So the batteries are going to be the thing that are the heaviest part of the whole system. But the batteries are still lighter than the fuel, especially as you have longer missions. So it's another very complicated optimization function, and we have to build models and simulations because it's not always intuitive how to optimize these systems. In some ways computers are better at figuring out these optimizations because our instincts, our intuition doesn't really serve us well when we're dealing with systems that we've never experienced before in the field. So we try to model and simulate everything and really show them if you have this much electrical load. We actually, we're working with the Marines now to get real world data so we can really show them how our system will better perform. And actually the software we're building for that project, the Army actually paid us we just won another $1 million. Well, we haven't won the contract officially yet, but I think we've got a really good chance of winning another $1 million contract, providing logistics software to the Army to help them understand their energy needs in remote places, and then eventually understand how they can use airborne power generators to serve those energy needs. But that's the biggest problem is they don't really value energy very effectively. So it's hard for them to understand how our system can create value for them.
It makes sense why they wouldn't value energy, because the one place in America that if everything else goes to hell, the military will have access to the last pieces of energy that we have, right? Like they've never had to worry about being able to access energy before. So being stranded on an island fighting some Chinese proxy war, all of a sudden wind energy becomes a lot. Well, you can't get the tanker there because the submarine's in the way. It's nice to be able to keep your communications device so the helicopter can come get you and take you out.
I think that's part of the idea. We just have to, we have to develop that technology, really show them how and where it's used, and get it so they're war gamers and they're planners and stuff. Throw this into the mix, and they can start to see how it changes their operations in a really positive way. That's the goal anyway. That's our goal.
So with war games, what do? They like say, okay, we're going to put some of these in, we're going to get this much energy, or we could put in another missile launcher. Which one gives us the better probability of winning?
Yeah, they model everything. They're getting better now at modeling in the war game logistics. In the past, they've kind of not done that very well. So that's an exciting development. And I'm hoping that they'll start to see how having that resiliency, because that's like, if you think about it, if you're the red team in a kind of red team, blue team war game simulation, you're going to try to cut off their fuel supply. That's like your biggest objective. So if you're not wargaming logistics and you're just calling your logistician at the end of the war game and saying, I used 40,000 gallons of fuel, how are you going to get that fuel there? And then the logisticians give you their plan for delivering the fuel for that war game. Well, the fuel trucks are the biggest target on the battlefield, so you have to include those in the war game, or the war game doesn't make any sense. So that's I think that they're starting to get better at that. They're starting to realize that it's not just two frontline troops just like going at, it's like it's a multi-dimensional, multi-domain war fighting environment now, where they have cyber operations, they have insurgents, they have everybody's trying to, and the biggest thing you're trying to disrupt is your enemy's energy supply, because if you can cut that off, you've won the war. So and that goes all the way back to the refineries. It goes all the way back to the oil wells. At some point, you have to think of the supply chain, and I think we're more primed to think of supply chains more systematically in the COVID era, because we've seen these disruptions in supply chain.
Yeah.
So if you think about what the Chinese might do or the Russians might do to disrupt our fuel supply system, that's the biggest threat. Some hackers hacked a fuel supply pipe network or something like last year and cut off fuel to from the whole East Coast by to the gasoline supply. Those kind of things, and that's just a bunch of guys trying to make a few bucks in ransom. Imagine if it was a systematic effort by a nation state to disrupt our fuel supply.
Right.
What's going to happen there? So in a lot of ways, having this diversity in fuel supply and having more options, it just makes sense to me. I hope our system someday can provide power. Like we want to go offshore. We want to provide power for coastal communities. We have plans to make our system quite a bit bigger. I think that's the thing you saw, John, was I think a 600 kilowatt system, which is 30 times more power than that. The 20 kilowatt system I was talking about, which is 600 times more power than the little tiny system I'm talking about. So it's a huge difference in size for what they were trying to achieve. We've got a different vision for how these systems can get better, and we think this kind of iterative approach to optimization is the way to success, versus designing something from start to fit it. You don't give yourself a chance to take advantage of that learning curve, that learning that happens by building, testing, and building and testing. Yeah,
let's go. So with the supply chain, like, it's interesting what you said about energy. John and I talk about all the time. If there were 100 million individual locations in America producing and storing their own energy locally, like, what would you attack at that point if you can't cut off a nation's energy supply. You could blow up every refinery, you could blow up every pipeline and every fuel truck, and you couldn't disconnect us. So it's very beautiful insight of you to recognize that that is a key strategic aim in a red-blue war game, is how do we cut their fuel off and doing something for our country to help us not be the team that gets cut off.
It's funny how people complain a lot about renewables, like somehow like hurting the fossil fuel system because we're not investing enough in fossil fuel. But come on, really? I mean, we've got wells everywhere. We've got millions of uncapped wells that have been abandoned that are polluting our groundwater. I mean, it's just the fossil fuel system as it's been built. It built America. So it's like, but at some point it isn't America. It's like, right. Yes, it was important to get us to this point, but we always knew the oil was going to run out eventually. There's at some point, there's no more place on the planet where we can find oil economically. And is that going to happen in 30 years? It's going to happen in 60 years? It's going to happen in 100 years? I don't know when that point happens, that we just can't keep growing our economy using fossil fuels. But if we go 30 years and continue trying to grow our economy with fossil fuels, for one, climate change is going to start costing us more than we're saving. And actually renewables are cheap now, and that's what's changed. It's like people are still operating in this mindset from 2000 when 20 years later solar and wind are the cheapest source of new power compared to anything. It's just they're cheaper and they're better, and they create this distributed network of energy supply that's not dependent on this bottleneck that has to go through the refineries, this bottleneck that has to go through, our current system is very vulnerable to disruption. And I think a distributed system is going to be more resilient and able to sustain our country. People can live without being, tied to this current international fossil fuel system, which is, killing our planet, and it's just not stable. It's like, it makes me nervous to think that I might not be able to fill up for gas. I mean, it is an inherently unstable system, and it's unsustainable. It's unstable and unsustainable,
and expensive. It's only $2.5 billion a day we spend on oil in America. Not much.
Yeah, but I mean, just to hear, I love how confidently you said that solar and wind are the least expensive, and Lester and I are 100% in line with that. But when somebody says something super confidently, this isn't like research you're doing. Why do you think that that's not common knowledge, or do you think it is? And why do you think you don't see solar panels and wind farms everywhere?
Well, it's a different. I mean, when I say it's cheaper over 20 years. And it requires capital. So wind and solar today require a huge investment of capital, and it pays back over longer periods of time. Actually, pretty quickly in some cases, depending on the economics, with subsidies and whatnot. But they're designed to pay back over a long period of time. And for the fossil fuel system, all you have to do is buy a diesel generator for a few $1,000, and then you pay for fuel, but your capital expenditure upfront is less, and it requires less planning in terms of your model, your personal economic model of how this is going to affect you. It's not as simple as I'm going to pay this much for fuel, get this much electricity. So it requires the customer to kind of have a mental leap. And also you're dealing with a huge amount of misinformation and propaganda from the fossil fuel industry. So, I don't want people to think I'm anti-oil or anti-fossil fuel. I think they served a purpose in getting our country and our world to this point. But if we don't figure out how to disentangle ourselves from the system within the next 10 years and have options for people, I think we're reaching a tipping point for climate change. It's happening faster than I ever imagined. I didn't think this was going to be an issue in my lifetime, really. But I did know that when I started this company, I really wasn't a climate change fanatic. I think I'm more so now. than I was when I started this journey. But I was more just like, at some point we're going to run out of oil anyway. So why not use these amazing technologies that have a potential to be cheaper without being tied to the volatile market forces and international cartels that run the oil industry. So, it's like the idea was, we're going to hit peak oil sooner or later. Our economy can't continue to grow. People's lives, I'm not saying I think the problem that people have with renewable energy is that in the 70s, when people started doing solar panels renewable, it was really expensive, super expensive. And I think the focus became on efficiency. Like, I'm going to wear a sweater at my house because I can't afford to pay my power bill. I'm going to use less. I'm going to wipe my butt with one sheet of toilet paper instead of 3, so that I can use less toilet paper. It's like there was this whole movement of use less, and I think that is not a really compelling sales pitch.
Right, especially when
you're not going backwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's like here's renewable energy. You can shiver in your house and be miserable. It's like, no, it's like, here's renewable energy that you can live the exact same life. In fact, it may be so much cheaper that you can, have a hot tub every night and not have to feel guilty about it. Like, at some point, renewables, because there is a storage issue, right? So there may be, as you said, intermittency is an issue. Okay, maybe I'm not going to take a hot tub tonight because the sun didn't shine, the wind didn't blow. But tomorrow night is supposed to be a sunny day, so I'll store up that energy through the day and have a nice hot tub tonight. I mean, you can, like, if you can plan your life a little bit around the weather conditions, not a lot, but that's the difference, is you're not giving anything up. You're just maybe changing when it happens, or you're choosing to pay more for batteries, so you have that flexibility. So, but batteries right now are the expensive piece of the equation. So that's what I say. It's like, it's not like you actually have to change your life. You just have to make different decisions. You have to have, hopefully, software that helps you make those decisions intelligently without too much cognitive load.
It's there's two things that you said that may blow your mind, and you might quit your 15 years of wind and just go all solar. I'm not.
I mean, I think the technology we have is amazing potential, but if somebody made the case to me tomorrow that, like, solar's, you can't compete with that, I think solar and wind are actually great because they're complementary. They don't really compete with each other necessarily. I just heard two things that we can go in further depth in the hot tub sometime together, but one of which is that for 95% of people who have embraced the transition to solar energy, makes no difference when they choose to use their electricity, because they're still connected to the power grid. So whether it was sunny or cloudy that day, makes no difference. Their hot tub is going to work exactly the same. Their lights are going to work exactly the same. And their solar array is just designed, as you mentioned, to be calculated, especially because it's the sun, over a 12-month period of time. So and the other one is, while solar technology really hasn't changed much over the last 60, 70 years, the efficiencies have, I think that maybe they're like 15% more efficient. The cost has gone way down, like you mentioned, but the crazy thing is the main thing that's caused an explosion in solar from our perspective is a product called financing product, where you don't have to spend a single penny out of pocket at all, no upfront cost, to have all your solar installed and activated and turned on, so you can see it on your phone and monitor it. And even if you wanted batteries, you could get a battery system and have backup power when nobody else has it without spending a single dollar out of pocket. And often what their monthly payment is less than what they were paying to the utility company. And that's for, Lester, like a real conservative thing. Would you say that's like 75% of people in the United States, if they got a solar quote, their monthly payment would be less than their utility bill?
From us, sure. Yeah, like from us. But like, this is what Rob's talking about, capital needs. Because if you rewind, the discoveries of all the great things, internet, telephone, the weapons, whatever. And you rewind, if we could start over again, and we had solar panels and wind laid out, and we had this super giant fossil fuel system that had to be created, where people have to go to work every day, and it creates all kinds of geopolitical conflicts. 100 years ago, if the technology were available, there's no question. If we already had renewable technology, nobody would be talking about how it might make sense to develop a fossil fuel infrastructure. Right? If it had been built from the beginning, like, there's no question we wouldn't want to go build that. So it's just a matter of, like, letting go of it, which requires capital. And it's what John's saying, is that the capital is starting to come online, even for individuals to benefit from any sort of technology.
Well, that's what I think is cool about our system, is it's very mobile. So even like if we do go offshore and we've got, floating systems of thousands of these things, well, it's all it needs is an anchor. So you don't have to put a foundation down. You don't have to permanently in place it. So that may open up capital options, because we could go off the coast of St. Petersburg or something and be powering the city of St. Petersburg with 10,000 of our systems floating off the coast in this little area, and whatever. And then the fisher people start complaining about it, and somebody says that it's damaging they went marlin fishing, and they wanted to go marlin fishing in the spot because the fish really like it there, so they're going to go there, but they can't go there because there's all these airborne wind systems. So DeSantis gets all up against airborne wind energy, and we're like, okay, we're going to go to Georgia. See you guys later. Savannah needs power. It's mobile, so it's like it's like gets rid of all these kind of like, hey, just let us try it for a year, and if you don't like it, we'll go up the coast. Our installation costs are only 5% of the cost of the whole system, and we can go someplace where they like us and they're willing to pay us more money. So, I mean,
now you gotta invent a mobile buoy that will allow you to take it to Georgia along the coast by flying the kites, right? And just pull up the anchor, fly the buoy all the way around.
Yeah, but it's actually already invented, so it's a patent we filed last year. So.
Okay.
It's a great idea, John. I'm glad I thought of it first.
So I guess just a couple more questions. We're almost up against an hour and don't like to take up too much people's time, but two more things I wanted to ask you is what question do you wish more people would ask you or ask you about? Like, if somebody came up and asked you the best question for you and your mission, or you personally, there's really no qualifications. What do you wish more people ask you about, to give you a chance to?
I mean, we're a 95% a software company, and we've made some really cool innovations within the software that we work on, and I'd like to engage more with our customers, talking about our digital engineering process, talk about how as a company we develop user interfaces, user experience around making our own engineers more efficient. And we're not necessarily planning to sell that technology, but that's I guess that I want people to understand like how we do things differently and why we may have a chance to succeed where other people have failed. I mean, success isn't guaranteed, but I think we're approaching it in the right way. And I'm really excited to show people the results of the systems, both software systems and the processes we've developed as a company to make these systems. I'm really proud of what our engineers have developed, what our shop floor technicians and prototyping team has developed, electrical engineers, and it's just hard to communicate how complex our systems are and how we've spent 15 years investing in the system so we have a chance to succeed today.
It's not just a platypus drone by happenstance. It's a lot of love and effort that went into that.
Yeah, I mean, and then actually that system that we show people is very similar to other systems, but we also have a whole set of designs that we just can't show anybody yet because we're still a small company. we try not to publicize stuff that we can't defend. We can't, it costs money to defend intellectual property, and we just don't have the capital to defend all the intellectual property we've created over the last 15 years. So consequently, we have to kind of be in like the stealth mode. And I know stealth mode sounds really cliche, but it's just that's the thing that is hardest for me. I come from an academic background, so my instinct is just I want to share everything with the world, but we can't, because our investors have invested in this intellectual property, and we have to protect it, so that eventually we can build this company to be the what I think could be a very successful organization.
It sounds like you guys are kind of like Slack, in that Slack, to my understanding, was invented by a bunch of guys that were working on some project, and they wanted to learn how to communicate effectively between themselves, and their own little communications protocol that they built became Slack. So what you're saying is that what you're learning through this designing process and all these years of trials and errors and computer simulation, if you told us everything that you developed, somebody with a lot of resources might watch it, develop it, put you out of business, and you don't have the money to even go reclaim it after the fact if you've gone out of business as a company. So it's better just to keep it on the down low for now, and then surprise. Will you come back on and tell us about it when you can tell the world about it?
Yeah, I would love to. Hopefully I can have some videos and show you how it works. We're trying to get the Army to fund some of that right now, and we're doing it. Like I said, we're doing this other project for logistics for them, but in the process of doing that, we're actually, again, investing in our own systems and improving our own operations. So it's yeah, it'll be fun when we can finally share this work with the world in more detail.
So how fast will it be to deploy the solution, do you think? Like, you look at a 5-year timeline, 10 years to your producing?
I mean, we're really aiming for 2020, near the end of 2023, we should have some there's a whole other process through 2022, and then early 2023. And then I think we'll have a system that the Marines are going to want to buy kind of, summer, early fall of 2023. That's my goal. I mean, it takes a long time to get the military to approve things for military specifications. So, but who knows? They may decide it's urgent enough that they want to invest money in it, and then we can move a lot faster if that's what they want to do. So, at the latest, I'd say the end of 2023 with just our current glide path. Maybe early 2023 if we can actually get some folks this year to really invest in what we're doing. And it's just all a matter of how much resources are available.
It's amazing how that works. Where's I guess I had a couple more fun questions to ask. I don't remember what they were. So I guess you were the nerd getting bullied in junior high, and now you've created a potential breakthrough energy solution for humankind. So if there's some kid that's like a nerd, or even if they're not a nerd, you can give them advice too. What advice would you give a young person who happens to stumble across this and fast forward to the end and hear this question?
I would say, if you really, you have to be willing to question yourself and your own worldview a lot. But once you kind of come up with a solution, don't necessarily let other people convince you you're wrong too easily. You want to challenge your assumptions all the time, but sometimes it's better just to stick with something that everyone else says is a bad idea and see what happens. Because going down that path, even if it ends up being a bad idea, make an attempt to prove everybody wrong. It's worth it to just, everyone's going to discourage you. I just read a thing yesterday from a guy I really respect who said, airborne wind energy is dead. That's what he said. I was like, okay, well, I look forward to the day where I can, I was thinking in my mind, I look forward to the day I can prove it wrong. And I think when you're young and you think you know everything, and you're, there's a balance there, between admitting you don't know everything and seeking out people that challenge you and your assumptions. but at your core, you kind of have to be confident in, even if you're naively confident, sometimes just keep going and see what happens, and sacrifice, security, sacrifice what you have to come to the answer that you're looking for. And I may find that answer 6 months from now that conclusively proves that I've wasted the last 15 years of my life, but I still wouldn't regret a minute of it.
That's awesome, man. It's like that Calvin Coolidge quote, I'm sure which says, nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent and have and always will solve the problems of the human race. So I acknowledge you for your persistence and your courageousness. Thank you for coming on and talking to us tonight. You're welcome to come back whenever you want to. And I hope this works. And if anybody's watching this that wants to support, how would they get in touch with you? Like, would they go to Windlift? Like, what? Somebody's like, oh my gosh, I have $100 million and I really want one of those platypus kites to make some energy at a farm somewhere, or to help the military get it so we can win. How do they give you money or get in touch with you?
Just rob@windlift.com. Just like, Jeff at Amazon.com or Larry at Google.com. It's a lot of founders of companies have a very simple email address, and you can sometimes just guess it and send an email and get a response.
So Rob at windlift.com. So thanks for being on, Rob. Is there anything else you want to say or ask tonight before we go?
Just good to see you.
Be good to catch up sometime.
I know we missed the New Year's party. It was a COVID extravaganza over here, and we just were being as responsible as possible.
Well,
good to see the photos, though.
Everybody's getting the Omicron. I don't know how to pronounce it.
The Cron. We just call it the Cron.
The chronic is everywhere. Yeah.
Well, that's a hot tub in a few months, but we won't talk about that with military contracts. So
yeah, we'll wear masks in the hot tub. All right, sounds good.
Great to see you, Rob.
Happy
Tuesday.
Thanks for putting this together. I really appreciate it. Have a good night.
Sure, you too.